Chapter 17. Alcohol Escape. At last, the wait was over, and the prison gates would open.
Mom, can I go out now?
What time is it?
She muttered. I looked over at the alarm clock, and it read 7:30.
10 o'clock.
I said.
Then how come it says 7:30?
That's what I said. It's going on 7:30.
I thought you said it was 10 o'clock.
No, Mom, it's 7:30.
Oh.
She closed her eyes again, and I decided to chance it. I crept out of the bedroom, grabbed my shoes, and started to put them on when I heard her get out of bed.
It's too early for you to go out.
She said.
But not too early for a paper route?
I thought to myself.
And another thing.
She said.
You're turning into a real smart aleck. Be careful, or stay in the house for the rest of your life.
I think I would like that, Mom.
I was pushing, so I backed down by explaining that I was having a hard time waiting, and the fire settled down in her eyes.
It's just a few more hours. You'll make it,
she said. My thoughts turned to food, and I began my breakfast ritual of eating toast until I was stuffed, then going back to sleep. I woke to my brothers eating their breakfast in the kitchen, and my eyes darted to the clock. 9:40. Just 20 minutes left in captivity. I ran to the front porch to see if there was any action in the neighborhood, and across the street, girls were already playing jump rope. I put on my white high tops, grabbed a shirt from the closet, combed my hair, and brushed my teeth in the bathroom. It wasn't quite 10 o'clock, but it was close enough, so I bolted out the front door, flew down the steps, and ran up Blackstone toward the field with the smell of freedom in the air. I saw a familiar tree branch hanging over the sidewalk as I ran, and, picking up speed, jumped high in the air, trying to touch it. I noticed that I barely left the ground, and my stomach jiggled from the weight I had put on. I buttoned my shirt to cover the fat, and the thought of the guys picking on me made me wince. I turned left on 91st and saw the guys gathered at the field. My heart exploded with joy, and I broke into a trot. Bush pointed toward me, and the other guys turned to watch me coming toward them. "Well, look who's here," Bush said. I stood in the middle of my pals, who were all glad to see me.
We still going to the beach?
I asked. "Yes, we are," Bush said.
How do we get there?
I asked. "Hitchhike," Bush said. "It's not hard. Someone will stop and give us a ride." As we walked toward Stony Island Avenue, some blacks had moved into the neighborhood, even in the short time I was grounded.
The neighborhood is changing, huh?
"Yeah," Bush said. "My parents started looking for a new house in the suburbs." I felt a surge of fear. He had been my pal my whole life. "You guys go hide behind the fence," he said. "When a car stops to pick me up, the rest of you come running and jump in." Hitchhiking was new and very exciting, and we stood in a huddle and put our hands on top of one another's.
All for one and one for all,
we chanted. Bush went for the street, while the rest hid behind the fence. We crouched down low and peered between the wooden slats to watch as Bush stood with his thumb out from the curb. The cars flew by, and when the light turned red, Bush walked out between the cars and asked for a ride. When the light turned green and he was still in the street, a car honked at him to move out of the way, and an old man in a beat-up blue car yelled out his window, "Take a bus!" As he drove by, Bush birded him, and we all laughed. The grouch must have seen him in his rearview mirror because he put his brakes on and yelled something back at Bush. Bush yelled back, "Yeah, yeah!" and shot him the finger again. It was hilarious. We all stood up, slapped each other on the backs, and laughed. I yelled,
"You're my hero, Bush!"
And at that moment, we were close as a gang. David turned to me and said, "I'm sorry Bobby didn't say she was your girl." I didn't know what to say. I didn't have time to think of anything because Bush called, "I got one!" Bush was crouched beside a big blue station wagon, his head in the front passenger's window talking with the driver. He pulled his hat out of the car, pretended that he was coughing, and waved us over. And we poured out from behind the fence and ran towards the car. Bush reached back, opened the rear door, and we filled the car before the driver knew what hit him. "All you had to do was ask," he said, once we had rejoined the traffic. "Where are you guys headed?" "To the beach, cabbie," Bush said airily. "You're a real smarty, aren't you? I'll drive you to the beach." "Perfect," Bush replied. I looked out the window and tried to take it all in as we headed up Stony Island. We turned right on 75th and headed toward the lake. It was the first time I had been out of the neighborhood without my parents, and I knew I was not supposed to be doing this, at least not without telling them. It felt both scary and fun at the same time. We pulled over at a stoplight, and the man said, "This is it." We all scrambled out, and Bush said, "You guys head over to the beach, and Jimmy and I will meet you there with the beer."
Beer?
I asked. "Yeah," Bush said. "Seeing it's your first day out, we thought we'd celebrate."
I don't know about getting drunk.
"You won't get drunk, just a little high," Bush said. "You'll be fine by the time you get home. Stay with me, and I'll show you how it's done."
How what's done?
"How we get the beer. Now you guys take off." I watched as they walked toward the beach, then turned back to Bush.
So, what do we do?
"We wait until someone who might buy for us goes into the liquor store. The guy behind the counter knows we're buying beer from him, but if someone old enough carries it out the door, he doesn't care." A man about the same age as my father came around the corner. When he got close to us, Bush stopped him. "Would you buy it for us?" He shook his head. "No. I have sons your age. You're not old enough to drink." And he continued to walk down the street. "Sometimes it takes a while to get the right guy," Bush said. "Here comes someone else." This guy didn't even respond. He just kept on walking. "That's the rudest thing I've ever seen," Bush said. "Ask someone a question and they don't even answer you? Remember, Jimmy, when someone asks you a question, at least have the decency to answer." Right on the heels of his sarcasm, Bush asked another man, "Hey, mister, would you buy it for us?" "Beat it, punk," the man replied. We laughed, and Bush yelled, "There he is." I followed Bush's eyes across the street and saw an older man in a long, dirty brown overcoat. He shuffled along at a slow pace, his pants tucked into a pair of worn-out black boots, and he was walking with his head down as if he was looking for something he'd lost. Bush dashed across the street, dodging traffic, and I followed more cautiously. "Lucas! How are you?" Bush said. Lucas looked up briefly. "I'm okay." Then he scanned the ground, and I wondered what he had lost. "Lucas, will you buy for us?" Bush asked. Lucas looked up, and his eyes locked with mine. "Who's he?" "He's okay," Bush responded. He looked me up and down. "I don't know. You look young, kid. How old are you?"
12.
I muttered. "You look like you're 7, and returned to looking at the ground. Bush said, "If you buy for us, we'll buy you what you want." "It will cost you a bottle of wine, and that's $4. "We've got it," Bush replied. The older man looked at me again. "You're too young to be drinking, kid. Go home and play in your sandbox." I stood motionless, looking the other way because it was so eerie. "What do you want?" Lucas asked Bush. 5 6-packs of beer." Bush gave Lucas the money, and Lucas told us to wait around the corner. As he was walking away, I found the courage to call out,
Hey, Lucas, what are you looking for?
He stopped, turned around, and looked me right in the eyes. "Kid, I started drinking when I was about your age, and I haven't been able to stop since. I'm 45 now, and I've lived on the street for years. I look down because I'm hoping to find some money that fell out of someone's pocket. It started like you, just for fun, and then I began to need it. You should think twice about what you're about to do. You could end up like me." He turned and strolled across the street, looking for money, even at the intersection. I asked Bush,
How'd you meet Lucas?
"He's been buying for my brothers and their friends for years," Bush said.
Man, that's the first time I've seen anyone like him close. He's scary.
"Don't let Lucas bother you with that speech," Bush said. "He gives it to everyone the first time." Finally, he surfaced. Beer piled so high you could hardly see his face, and his brown bag of wine was on top. We unloaded him and headed for the beach, cutting through several streets and crossing South Shore Drive. We walked in the park until we came to a fence with a small gate that opened onto the beach. Since my only other visit to the beach had been at night, this was my first natural look at Lake Michigan. I was overwhelmed by the number of people in the sand and the lake's size. I couldn't even see across to the other side. The water was a deep blue, and white clouds hung overhead like fluffy pillows. It was a lot different from the pool at the park. "We'll hide this in the bushes just in case the cops come around," Bush said. We stashed most of the six-packs, grabbed a can, and walked back out to the clearing, popping the tops. I took a sip, and it tasted horrible.
I think it'll take some time to get used to this.
I told Bush. "You'll get used to it. It's an acquired taste." I forced another swig down my throat, then another, until I felt lightheaded. I leaned over, grabbed another beer, popped the top, and took a gigantic gulp. We stood in a circle, each holding our beer, and told football stories, baseball stories, and girl stories, and they never seemed to end. I felt euphoric after my lonely summer, and I was out with my best friends, telling stories and drinking beer. I wish this could go on forever. From behind, I heard a familiar hello. Bobby, Janet, Marie, and a couple of other girls from our neighborhood walked toward us. Bobby seemed awkward and stood next to David, and I felt sad. All the boys took off their shirts, except me because I felt fat. All I wanted was to cover up my fat, and I grabbed another beer and took a big swig, feeling it burn down my throat. After one more long drink, my head was dizzy, and I noticed I was swaying from side to side. "Hey, take it easy with that stuff," Bush laughed. "There's plenty left. You're drinking like there's no tomorrow." I returned to the bushes, grabbed another beer, opened it, and turned to the group. I raised the can and toasted them, and an hour later, I had drunk myself into my first blackout.